Okay, Programming 12. So you almost have enough information to go and make your buttons, and you're going to be filling out the main tab, the void setup, the void draw, to recreate something like this. But we need to know how to make the button clickable. Hopefully you're feeling comfortable enough to make the buttons show up. But how do I make it click? Like when I click the black button, the background changes black. When I click the blue button, the background changes blue, and so on. So how do I make that work? So I'm going to share with you a special variable that I've created, and it's going to require a function to power it. So basically, I want to make my own built-in variable in processing. It's going to be called mouseReleased, and I think that that'll make the button class work so much better. So just to take a look, this is my main tab. I'm not going to show too much about it. Here's my colors if you want to use similar colors as me in my example. You can type those down, but I don't really care what the colors are you use as long as they are not appallingly bad. So here we got ourselves two new variables. mouseReleased is going to be the new variable that will allow our classes to be like, hey, did the person click and release the mouse while they were on top of me? That's going to be really important. And in order to make it work, we need to know was pressed. We're going to have another variable that we're going to keep track of. So these are two new Boolean variables. Technically, all of them will be available for all classes and stuff, because I'm going to define this function in the main tab. Or you can make a separate tab. Actually, this might be smarter to make a separate tab. Make a new tab called Utilities. So we're going to get ourselves a bunch of nifty functions that'll be useful that don't really belong to any particular place that I always want to be running at all times. So I'm actually going to go down here. Here's my void click, and let's put it into Utilities. Just to confirm, I'll make sure it still runs. I didn't break anything, because that would be annoying. Yeah, it still works. Okay, great. So in other words, we aren't going to have a mouseReleased function, and this is all going to work because we're going to make a mouseReleased variable, and then our button can tell if it's being clicked or it's not being clicked. So that's going to be important. So we'll come back and talk about this. First, let's talk about the mouseReleased variable. So the mouseReleased variable is a tricky thing because the moment that you here's a mouse. I just happen to have one. When you push down, the mouse pressed variable can be true for many frames, right? Like right now I'm clicking and holding this mouse. mouseReleased is true frame after frame after frame. But it can only be true for one frame when you release the mouse, right? At that moment when I release the mouse, then it's true, and then it immediately goes back to being false again until I press it and release it again. But no matter how much I press, it's only ever true for one frame that the mouse is being released. So that's why the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to false. So this function is going to be called every frame. So you got to make that happen in the draw function, and even outside of the mode framework. And so that way, every frame we're going to start assuming mouseReleased is false. And if we don't prove it otherwise, we don't change it, it'll still be false. So that's kind of our resetting feature. So next, we check to see if the mouse is being pressed. So this is the built-in variable mouse pressed. And so when it goes down, I want to record that fact. I want to be like, yeah, it was pressed. We are being pressed. And then once we then go into the next if statement, we can check to see, hey, was it pressed? And is it now not being pressed? The reason why we need this is so that we can remember that at some point we had pushed down, on the previous frame we had pushed down. That's why we have the past tense here, was pressed. And now we can check to see if we're not pressing it anymore. The exclamation mark here means not. And not is a Boolean operator. Basically, it's just saying if this is not being pressed. If this was true, it becomes false. If it was false, it becomes true. You could also say it like this. If you're weirded out by that, you could say if mouse pressed equals false. So in other words, what this is saying is the mouse was pressed, and now it is not currently pressed. In this one frame, just a while ago, it was pressed, and now it is not pressed. That means we have released the mouse. That is the literal definition of what it means to release a mouse, right? We were pressing it, now we're not pressing it. And so what we can do is we can set mouse release to true. For this brief, shining moment, mouse release becomes true. And we got to reset was pressed, because now we want to forget all that stuff and get ready for a new cycle. So this if statement basically is that moment when we have released it, and ever after from until the end of the frame, this variable will be true. When we start again next frame, we'll set it back to false again. So that way, this mouse released variable will be only ever true for one single frame. So in order for this to work, you have to make sure you call the click function from your draw function. I would do it at the very top of the draw function, just to power this mouse released variable. And that's going to just make a lot of nice things happen for us. Okay, so that's the story about our void click and our mouse released variable. So now let's go back to the button. So here, our button, we can set a clicked variable now to true. This is inside of each button. In each button, we want to know if it's being clicked or not. It's a Boolean variable, and so we can look at mouse released. So we can say, hey, if the mouse was just released, which of course is powered by our lovely click function, and the mouse was inside the rectangle, which again, oh my gosh, we got to turn that into a function. So I'm going to make a list of things we're going to do. This has got to be a function here, a new behavior function, a beautiful behavior function that means we don't repeat ourselves. Before we get into that, notice that, hey, if the mouse was released and the mouse was inside of our button, then we set click to true. And if that's not true, we set it to false. So in other words, that will become true for a brief shining moment for the rest of the frame. And then we can go from there to activate whatever it is we want to activate. Okay, so that creates our button. That is the entire button class. We have the class itself, and we have this utility function, void clicked, which you do have to manually call from the draw function to give us the tools we need to have the button check if it's being clicked without any void release, void mouse press, void mouse release function or anything like that. Now all the buttons can just monitor themselves. So here's your first task of a button checkpoint. I'd like you to go ahead and using this button class and using this click utility, I want you to try to make this sketch. So the buttons should be object oriented, and you need to be able to click on the different things inside. Now, I know there's a little bit, and of course the background is going to change as a result. There's a little bit of information that's still missing, and that is going to be, I think you have enough information from previous examples to understand how to call the constructor, but don't hesitate to ask if that's giving you troubles. And I think you have enough information to know how to make the button show up on the screen, but I think it will be difficult, possibly, to take a look at whether the button is being clicked or not. So I'm just going to show you an example inside of just some random code here. Just going to put it like over here, like as a comment. So if you have a button object, so let's say it was called my button. Yeah, my button. Let's say we have a button object called my button. Think about how you would declare that and instantiate it. Let's assume those things have been done because I kind of want you to try it out yourself. If you have a my button object, how do you see if it's been clicked or not? Well, you can access a button or any class's instance variables by putting a period and then the name of the variable. So this you can access from any function, the draw function, or like in the mode framework, in the game function or intro function or whatever. This tells you if it's being clicked. This returns true or false, and you can embed this into if statements. And so instead of having an intro clicks or something like that, like we can just put all this code into our game function, our all sorts of different functions, and go from there to build the button clicking stuff all in one place. So this would be an example of how you might see if the button's being clicked, and you can do that straight from the draw function or other functions. Okay, so I want you to give that a try and see how it goes. And I almost feel like for sure you're going to run into some challenges and some tricks and some confusion. And I'm kind of setting that up because those are the questions I want you to be thinking about and understanding by the end. So if you get stuck, just be aware that you've encountered one of the primary questions about this. Okay, so let's just review again. Last thing, I would like you to try to make this sketch using the button class and the clicked function, setting up everything so that you create some button objects and you instantiate them with the constructor, build them with the constructor, and then you're going to tell them to show every frame, and then using sort of an if statement, check if they're being clicked, and when they're clicked, set their background color to whatever their regular color is. Whatever, like blue button would set it to blue, the green button sets it to green, and so on. Okay, so that's your task, and I think we'll give you some time to do it, and then we'll probably go over it together as a group, because I think otherwise it's going to be a bit of a tricky one. So that's the first part of a several item checkpoint. We got a little bit more coming for you, but that's a good start to get you going. Okay, so good luck with making all that come together, and just call me over, work together. We'll figure this out all together. Thanks, everybody.